Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome, I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. Today's guest spent hours on barstools and riding in vans listening to outrageous tales from some of the best songwriters and storytellers in Nashville, Tennessee. She traded a stressful life as a pediatric cardiac sonographer for a happy one and now lives in Fernandina Beach, Florida, with her 3 dogs and 1 turtle. She is editor-in-chief of Reading Nation magazine and author of 2 short story collections, Walking the Wrong Way Home, which was a finalist for the Tartt Fiction Award, and Sharp as a Serpent's Tooth, Eva and Other Stories, which was voted the 2021 Best Bonus Book for the International Pulpwood Queen Book Club. Like the characters in some of her stories, she never misses a chance to jump in a creek to catch crawdads, stand up for the underdog, or make someone laugh. She's always making us laugh. So welcome to Authors Over 50, Mandy Hayes.
Thank you, Julia.
Mandy, our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, so what took you so long to write your first book?
Life. I started really young. I actually had my son before I had my driver's license. So I was, married and a mom really early. And then, my son was my whole life, in which, he should have been. And so it's just like, I never really thought about writing, even though as a kid, I wanted a book with my name on it. I didn't know, I wanted to be a writer, but I wanted a book with my name on it because I love to read so much. I started reading before I started kindergarten because I had an older sister that I wanted to do everything like. So I learned how to read when she did. And I guess back then I wasn't that young, but I don't know. It never really wasn't even part of my world because I was just raising my son and working. And two, because I dropped out of high school, I just sort of had that, you think of writers as these, brilliant people with all these, degrees and whatever. But when my son was in college, he was actually, he was getting a degree in journalism. And I was lonely. So I happened to find this writers group and just thought, well, it'd be something to do. But little did I know that one of the members of the writers group was actually an English professor at a community college at Ball State. And he really loved my writing. And he taught creative writing. And so I was like, oh, maybe I'll take a class, could I come sit in your class? And he was like, honey, you don't need to, we're trying to teach, you just need to write. So, that kind of got me thinking, ooh, maybe, but, I still had so many responsibilities. And even though my son was grown, my little nieces now, I helped coach softball, teams. And I don't know, I just never thought it was going to be that. And then I had some stories published in some little literary magazines, nothing big, but it was, fun. And I was getting that little thought of maybe I could be a writer, but everybody thought maybe, they read them like, oh, it's like a hobby. Cause I also like built furniture. I've welded a little bit. I paint. So it's sort of like, it's just another thing you do. But the older I got, my son had gotten married and he was doing well. And actually he had had his first child and I wasn't part of the picture, and it's like, it was just me. And I thought, I'm going to give this a try. I'm going to see what happens. Just see what happens. And it didn't happen then, but I got like a lot of really good feedback at a writing workshop or event they did, Don't Quit Your Day Job, with Rick Bragg. I'm a huge fan of Rick Bragg. And I thought, I know I can't get a hold of Rick Bragg. There's no way, for an endorsement, because I thought I was thinking of publishing a collection of short stories. And but I thought maybe I can get a hold of Sonny Brewer. And I did. And he read them, said he would write an endorsement, but to give him a call. And so when I called him, he said, you are good. Do not publish these stories yet. Do a little more work on them. Don't rush through this. Don't sign. I was going to sign with a small press. He said, don't do that. Like, your writing's good, but it could be great. So work was real stressful. So they got put on the back burner again. And then I just finally decided when things, there was just, so many things were happening in my life, and just, I'd gotten married and divorced, but I was married to a musician and that was another thing, I guess the validation was like Nancy Griffith and like Mike Henderson, Tammy King, these really well-established songwriters that are some of the best writers in Nashville. They were like, you're a writer, Mandy, you are a writer. So it's like, it'd be like a roller coaster. You'd think, oh, and then it's like, oh, and then life would happen and stuff. And then, so I got a divorce, moved to East Nashville, settling down, thinking I'm just going to be a grandmother and I'll just put everything on hold. And that just didn't happen. And I just thought, I am working a job. I started work. I'd been there for 26 years and it was about to kill me. The stress was terrible. And waiting for things to happen in my life that weren't happening. I thought it's time to just make them happen. And I left Tennessee with the whole thing of getting this book published, my first book published. I wanted to do it before I actually did it right before I turned 50. Which I know this is authors over 50, but all of my friends, my close adult friends, were in their 60s, because I had started out so young. So I did not feel like I was, in right before 50. I felt like, I felt like I was already in my 50s.
Well, you're a strong, independent woman, and you took your life and made it into something beautiful. Once you knew that you had to write this book or these stories, how did you proceed? Did you search for an agent? Did you decide to choose a hybrid or a small press or self-publish?
Okay, so since I, the whole plan, that's what Sonny was like, you really need to get an agent and get these published. Well, I quit my job, sold my house, gave everything away, was going to travel like John Steinbeck would Travels with Charlie and finish this, and in my mind think get an agent and whatever. But I ended up with I have 3 dogs instead of 1, and so the travel part was nuts. That was never going to work. And I'd left my turtle with a foster family, and I missed Albert. He's the sweetest little thing. Like, he comes when I call him. He's the sweetest thing. And I thought, I leaving and doing all that was enough adventure. I'm not like, I needed a home, because I didn't really have a stable one when I was younger. And it's like, I needed a home, I needed a roof over my head. So I ended up buying a house. And then time was running out, because I thought I need to get this. The whole reason I'd left Vanderbilt was to get to publish my book. And I hadn't even tried to get an agent because I was still getting it fine-tuned. I had had 2 offers from 2 small presses, and reading their contracts, I just thought, I'm going to do this myself. So I decided to self-publish. And I've enjoyed that process. I've loved it. But I had George Singleton, who was a huge idol of mine. He's a really fantastic Southern author. He's great. He read Walking the Wrong Way Home. I was watching an interview with him. Hub City, I think, was interviewing him, and he held up my book. They said, "Who are you reading?" He held up my book. I almost fell out of my chair. So I found his email, on his website, and I sent him to ask him what he thought. And he said, "Slick, you need to get yourself an agent." So I'm working on a novel now, and I'm going to try that route. Who knows? Who knows if it'll work or not? But I've had fun self-publishing my short stories.
Well, everybody loves your short stories, and I love your titles. Can you tell us what they mean? Walking the Wrong Way Home and Sharp as a Serpent's Tooth.
Okay, so Walking the Wrong Way Home is a line in the first story, actually, in the collection. Elma and Roy. It's 2 sides to every story. And it's Elma's story first. It's her birthday. She's 63. And she just realizes her whole life has never been hers. And her employer gives her some money for her birthday. And she has no idea what she's going to do with it. Like buy groceries probably, because she's never, it's never ever been about her. But as she's walking home from work, she's so caught up in all these thoughts about what she wanted and how her life turned out. And she's so caught in her thoughts, she finds out she's walking towards town. So she thought, she was like, I'm walking the wrong way, but it ends up, it was the right way. So that's how the title for Walking the Wrong Way Home came together. And then Sharp as a Serpent's Tooth. Everybody thinks it's, they say the Shakespeare quote, but it's not. It's actually in the Bible. It's be wise as serpents and innocent as doves.
And there's one about ungrateful child as well, I think. Yeah. Sharp as a serpent's tooth. The ungrateful child.
Well, it is, and it's so funny because after when I found that, because I just thought this is it, because they're all female protagonists. They are all way smarter than their years. But they're also innocent. Every single one of them, they're innocent. So that's how I came up with the Sharp as a Serpent's Tooth. And Eva.
Did real people inspire any of your characters?
Lots of them. There's, I write fiction, but there's a lot of truth in every story.
Well, I know that you're inspired by the largest book club in the world, all of these Pulpwood queens. How did you become involved with them?
Oh my gosh. So when Walking had just come out, River Jordan, who, if you've not read River Jordan, you need to read. She actually has a new collection of short. I still think it's new. It came out a few months ago. Sugar Baby and Other Stories. She's a great writer. I was taking a writing course of hers, and she said, Mandy, when this book comes out, have you joined the Pulpwood Queens? And I didn't know who I hadn't heard of them. I felt so stupid when I Googled Kathy's name, and then I'm like, how have I not known? I actually wrote a character in the novel, one of the novels, and I've got 3 that I'm working on, that before I ever met Kathy, who has cuts hair, has a little salon, and it's not a bookstore like Kathy's, but she has shelves of books that she does alone, like a little library. And so I'm like, how do I not know about Kathy? So it was River Jordan, and then Bryn McLean. Bryn McLean had just, One Good Mama's Phone had just come out. And these 2 women were like, Mandy, you really need to join the Pulpwood Queens. It's a great community. And then when I joined and I had a book event in Tennessee, they came out Like, it's just like, it's like, it's the coolest community of like supportive authors ever. Sort of like Fight Club. You know, it's sort of, I looked up and there was leopard print, and I thought, there's River Jordan at Brown's Diner. Yeah, I couldn't believe it. But that's, so I have to say, River Jordan was the person who said, you've got to join, you've got to.
Well, I had never heard of them until I moved to Texas. And now that I know them and know a lot of the members of the club, I realized that a lot of my friends back in Mississippi were members of the club. And so I'm going to speak to some of them in the next couple of weeks in Jackson, Mississippi. So you just never know, but it's all networking and finding somebody who'll tell you something. And, you know, our writer community is just so gracious and generous, and they will share great tips with you. And one of those is about the Pulpwood Queens book club.
It's fantastic, isn't it?
It really is. Well, tell us about the book that you've just written and give us a little synopsis, and then read a few paragraphs for us to hear the tone and the voice in your book.
So Oliver is a novella. It just came out. It is the story. Oliver is narrated by his little sister, Olivia. So she's telling Oliver's story. She loves her brother. It's set in the summer of 72. And it's during the summer, and they do these little pranks, these little anonymous, but they're not mischievous. It's Oliver, because he's such a good, big-hearted, sweet kid. It's like doing little good deeds, but Olivia likes it because they get to sneak, and they're kind of sneaking. So like they'll do a good deed for one person and make it look like it's somebody else. And that's getting the community, people, neighbors talking to each other and stuff. And it's all going good and they meet a man named Mr. Harrison that they just think is lonely. And they come up with an idea for him, and all the other plans have worked. So it's a little eye-opening, like that, you know, some adults have a lot harder lives. You know, they were so young and naive, and they find themselves kind of in the middle of Mr. Harrison's story. But Oliver knows that he needs their help. So I'll read a little bit so the book on the cover, if you notice, there's a gold ribbon on the front, and it's like, that's an important part of the story. It comes into play. So I'm going to read where that first comes into. Well, so they met Mr. Harrison, and they never take anything without giving something back. And they see that a sign for free puppies across the road from Mr. Harrison's house. And Oliver's like, if he had a puppy, he wouldn't be lonely. So they go to get a puppy, but they can't just take it. They trim some roses from Mr. Harrison's dead bushes, but they find some nice ones, put them in a jar, tie a ribbon around it. And that's what they do in exchange for a puppy. But when Mr. Harrison comes home, they're waiting to hear how happy he is. They're on their bikes waiting, but that's not what happens. Mr. Harrison came barreling through his back gate, carrying the puppy by the scruff of its neck. He went straight across the street and stomped up the front steps to the house. As he went to knock on the door, he noticed a jar of roses. He turned to look at his house and saw where we trimmed the bushes, but instead of looking pleasantly surprised, he looked furious. I could barely breathe as I watched Mr. Harrison turn a deep shade of purple, and I just about fell off my bike when he pounded on the door hard enough to knock the house numbers loose from the door frame. I turned to Oliver, but he wouldn't take his eyes off Mr. Harrison. I looked back in time to see the lady in the greenhouse coat swing the door open. Mr. Harrison shook the puppy in her face before he threw him in the lady's arms. Then he picked up the jar of roses and threw him in the middle of the street where it shattered in a million pieces. Finally, Mr. Harrison left her porch, stomping and cussing all the way back home. I wanted to tell the lady I was sorry that he'd been such a bully, but when she saw us on her bike, she slammed the door so hard it rattled the glass in the front window. Let's get the heck out of here, I said, and started home. Oliver rode up to where the jar had shattered in the street. He stopped to pick up the glass and called me back. Sissy, we can't just leave this here. I was embarrassed that I just rode by, but Oliver hadn't said it to make me feel bad. He just needed my basket to put it in. Why is he so mad? I asked, but Oliver was as baffled as me. When he'd gotten up all the glass he could, he picked up the piece of ribbon. You want this? He held it up. It had come untied and hung limp, wet with the water that used to be in the jar. I shook my head. No, it's got to be bad luck. Oliver turned to look at Mr. Harrison's house, all the while wrapping and unwrapping that ribbon around his finger. Finally, he turned back to his bike and said, I think it's got good luck in it. Feel it. Feels like it might have magic. Let's get out of here, I said, slapping his hand away. And Oliver slid the ribbon into his pocket, and I grinned in spite of how bad I felt, imagining the ribbon in there with all the other treasures Oliver carried around. He had a lucky rabbit's foot, a wheat penny, and a bookmark he'd made back when he was still young enough to go to Sunday school. It was creased in the center and worn thin where he'd folded it to fit in his pocket, and one of the corners were torn off, but Oliver treated it like it was worth $100. There wasn't no magic in that either. I knew it. I knew Oliver kept it because it reminded him of his old Sunday school teacher, Miss Carter. All the boys had loved her, and half of the daddies were known to make fools out of themselves over her too. Oliver had cried when she left, but Mom and her friends weren't sad one bit when pretty Miss Carter and her husband moved to Kentucky.
That's great, Mandy. Your characterization is excellent, and I can just see those children on those bikes, because all of us were those children on those bikes, growing up in the South. And, my mother would tell us, be home before dark, and we stayed out all day long. And now my grandchildren can't play in the front yard. It's a whole different ball game about, children and the freedoms that we used to have.
Yeah, it's sad.
Well, do you, as busy as you are, writing and editing and compiling everything that you do you still have time to read for pleasure?
I do. Not as much as I want to, but I do. I just finished reading Carolyn Haynes, her novel Touched, which she's going to be putting back out. Oh, it's so good. You talk about characters and voice and place. She's fantastic.
I want to read her. She's from Mississippi, isn't she?
She is. She's from Mississippi and she lives in Alabama now. And she writes so many genres. Like she writes cozy mystery. Like she has, golly, I can't remember, 28 maybe of her Sarah Booth. And I've not read her cozy mystery yet, but her Southern fiction, The Moon, but I can't think of the whole title. I read it. It was a little spooky. I read another one that has a little supernatural, like they're very Southern Gothic. Oh, she's fantastic. If I start talking about Carolyn, we'll just be here for too long.
Well, that's a great recommendation for our listeners to look her up. Mandy, what advice do you wish that you had heard when you were starting out to be a writer and to publish your first book?
Don't worry about the little, don't worry about what's going to happen once you're finished. Don't worry about where it's going to go. Don't worry about what you're going to do with it. Just put the words on the page. Just tell your story and your story. And also don't worry, like if it's in your mind, in your imagination, and you want to tell a story, if it's been told before, because nobody's going to tell it like you did. As long as you stay true to your voice, don't worry about all that. You just get those words on the paper.
I think that's excellent advice, especially for those of us over 50. We need to use our time wisely and to get those words on paper, because we have ticking clocks inside us. Is what I always told everybody I felt like I had. I didn't have much time and I wanted to do a lot with my time. So it's even shorter and sweeter. That's why I call it Writing in Life's Sweetest Third.
I love it. I love that.
What about marketing, Mandy? Have you found anything that really works writers don't always like to market ourselves and our work. Have you found what worked for you or what didn't work for you sometimes is as important?
Well, I just happen, my friends always laugh and say that I have the Midas touch. Because when Oliver, when Walking the Wrong Way Home, of course I read everything I could about what you do when a book's coming out. But man, when I bought the house here, I had to gut the house. Like, it was gutted. So I'm laying floors and like sheetrock. I mean, a lot of it I did myself. Like, and my dad came down. He was turned 76, and he was here helping me. And he brought out one of his helpers with him, and it's like we were sweaty, nasty, like. And then I was getting ready to release, get this book out. So it was. I thought, oh man, I'm late on all the stuff you're supposed to do. What I did, I just was so honest with it. Like, I have a collection of shorts, and people in Tennessee, I was lucky too, because people in Tennessee were waiting for it. So I'd say, hey, Tennessee friends, Walking the Wrong Way Home's coming out. And where I always did different art things, I thought, to sweeten the deal, I'm hoping I get 50 pre-orders. I said that I would do a small watercolor piece for each pre-order, like as a little bonus. I got 300 pre-orders. I had to paint I ended up doing cutting into bookmark shape and sketching in watercolor. 300, and that was my first watercolor. I'd not really done any watercolor before.
That was great, Mandy. You are truly a Renaissance woman. If you're welding and laying floor and watercoloring, I mean, you can do it all. So that's really fantastic. You are always so interesting and so delightful, and everybody who meets you wants to be your best friend. So will you be mine?
Oh, I'd be honored.
Thank you so much, Mandy, for sharing with our authors over 50 today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday, when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend, and check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's DAILY, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing, and remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.